Hi, I'm Kirby Allison, and we love to help the well-dressed acquire and care for their wardrobes. Today I'm in London, and I'm here with Simon Crompton of Permanent Style, a dear close friend of mine, someone I've known for, gosh, it seems like almost a decade now.
Yeah,
so,
it's a long time.
It's exciting to be able to sit down. I appreciate you setting time aside for us so that we could shine some shoes together as part of our Shoe Shine Sunday series and just chat. I'm Kirby Allison, and I love helping the well-dressed acquire and care for their wardrobes. Join me as we explore the world of quality, craftsmanship, and tradition. One of the ways that I like to start this off is for each of us to introduce our shoes, since this is kind of what it's about. So, since you're the guest, why don't you go first?
So these are Bespoke shoes from Stefano Bemma in Florence. They are the third pair of Bespoke shoes I've had from them, so the fit is pretty good at this point. They've been very well worn. They were inspired by a pair that my friend Tommaso Capozzi has, who works with Stefano Bemma.
Okay.
I always wanted a pair like his, and frankly, they should have been the first pair I had, but the first time round I was tempted by an extremely bright pair of tan shoes, which was a bad idea.
We all make that mistake.
But finally got it right on this pair, and it's using a hatch grain calf, which is sort of an homage to the Russian leather, reindeer Russian leather.
Okay. And what was it particular about these shoes that you really liked?
Good question. I think one part of it is a point we'll get into it later, I think, a little bit, which is about relationship. Mm-hmm. I think I met Stefano Bemma kind of before he died, and was such a lovely man, but also felt I had a very kind of personal connection to him as a result. And then also knew Tommaso Capozzi, who worked for Stefano at the time, so there was a real kind of relationship there. Mm-hmm. And then since then, I really like where Tommaso Milani, who now owns the company, what he's done with the place. Really taken it on, made it more international, invested in a shoemaking school, invested in a new facility. So they're really good things for the company. And then the shoes themselves are really nice. The fit's been great, the style's good. I'm quite kind of fussy about style of Bespoke shoes. Okay. I think a lot of people try and be too adventurous with Bespoke shoes and style. And as a result, I've had 3 shoes all on the same last and pretty much the same design.
All cap-toe Oxfords. This is semi-brogue.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I like how the hatch crane gives it a little bit more of a casual look.
Yeah.
It's almost like what you said, an ode to Russian reindeer. I mean, with the color and everything, could be Russian.
Yeah. And it's nice, I think, I found this again with hatch grain leathers, when you last it in different places, then the texture stays. So in the middle of the shoe, you get more of the texture, whereas in the heel and the toe, where you're having to stretch it more around the last, then that kind of texture gets kind of stretched out.
Yeah.
So
great. How long have you had them?
Not that long, actually. 2 years. Okay. But worn a lot. So.
Yeah. So there you go. And is it a double sole? I mean, it's quite a thick sole.
Yeah. It's not a double sole, but it's a fairly thick sole. It kind of comes into a single at the waist, or a thinner one at the waist.
Okay.
I think a lot of there isn't really much of. You couldn't really call it a tradition of Florentine shoemaking, but if anything, there is. It's very English and very kind of practical and rural. Mm-hmm. So actually, a lot of the kind of clothes tend to be, they like tweeds. They like shoes that feel kind of quite practical. So often there's a kind of thicker sole, and it's quite more of a walking shoe, I guess, as opposed to a lot of the sort of English city makers. They're much more a dress shoe.
Well, that is what I have. So this is a Bespoke pair of George Cleverleys. This is the Baron de Reedy in a burgundy pigskin. And as I was walking here, I was really taking note of just how much thinner the sole is, the outsole of a proper London city shoe. And I think this was one of the things that you first, really pointed out. It was whenever we were visiting Lee Miller at Texas Traditions, and you were taking off. I think it may have been a pair of Cleverleys also.
Yeah, I think it was.
And just talking about how the tradition of the West End shoemakers versus maybe like the Northampton, Gazziano and Girling Bespoke shoe is, that kind of lighter weight, finer shoe, which is beautiful.
Yeah, but it's great when you're kind of when you're going from the hotel into the taxi and into the shop and then into the party and then back to the hotel again. If you had to walk anywhere in any wet weather, then it's not so great.
Not so great. And I guess a double sole is really kind of taking that to the next level. And if you think of Florence, the cobblestone streets, I mean, you really need, in order to have stability in your shoe, a shoe that probably has a little bit more bulk to the outsole.
I think a lot of people forget about France as well, that it's a very small town in the middle of like a lot of countryside.
Yes.
And countryside is really, really important to it, so it actually feels more quite country influence. You see that a lot in the kind of hunting jackets and other kind of styles as well.
Well, let's get started. So these, I'm going to suggest, actually, I've got one jar of Renovatorium, a little light since we're traveling. The skin looks a little dry, so why don't you start applying this?
Sure.
Use this chamois. This is, I always recommend a plusher chamois for our creams, right? Because you're going to pick up more polish in order to really hydrate the leather. So why don't you start there? I'm going to grab one more chamois, and we'll share this. So, for those that aren't familiar with Simon, I mean, Simon is certainly evolved to be one of the preeminent authorities on classic menswear. I mean, being based here in London, your website, I mean, Permanent Style, I think for many of us, I mean, certainly myself included, is really how a lot of us were first introduced to, certain kind of rules and makers of just kind of classic menswear. So talk a little bit, I mean, for those that might not be too familiar with your site, share with us a little bit about kind of how you got started.
Sure. So Permanent Style is 11 years old this year. It started as a hobby. I was a financial journalist, so out of university I went and worked for a company that did publishing of financial magazines. I was a journalist there, wrote news, features, ended up being the editor of a couple of different magazines. And I think in total I worked at the company for 15 years, doing everything, covering everything from capital markets, M&A, accountancy, petroleum, everything. And that hobby kind of, really when I got money for the first time, I kind of was interested in getting tailoring, kind of buying a first suit. I remember my first suit I bought was a light grey suit from Zara with white pinstripes. It was absolutely horrific. It was horrible, and I couldn't work out why, but I was very annoyed that I spent all this money. Well, I spent the grand total of £129 on it, but for me that was a lot of money at the time.
Whenever you're first starting work, it's...
Yeah. And I was annoyed at that, and then I wanted to kind of understand a bit more about how good suits were made. And I remember very specifically, had a friend called Catherine who actually was living in New York at the time, and she was back in London. She was a colleague, and she just started a website about being an English woman dating in New York, which was very popular. And she was saying, we were sitting in the pub, and she's saying, rather than kind of banging on about suits the entire time and boring everybody, why don't you start a blog about it? Which, initially I was insulted about, but, she had a good point. And I think I was very lucky in that was when blogs were first taking off. But also she was right. I think a lot of guys, they're interested in clothes, but they don't want to talk about it the entire time necessarily. But if you give them information, and the information that's well written and well curated and very accessible, then they'll go to it and they'll use it. So that's how it started, and then it grew very slowly over the years. I think from the very start I was publishing very regularly. So we've always written 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for pretty much 11 years. I think my background as a journalist and editor kind of helped a lot in that respect, because my attitude was always to do it very professionally right from the start. Whereas a lot of guys, they start a blog, they look with enthusiasm for it, and then it's not going where they want, so they stop and they start again, and it's just harder to keep up momentum. So I was lucky in that respect. And I was always kind of very analytical in how I looked at things as well. Again, being a journalist, I was just used to interviewing people, to trying to give context to information the entire time, to interviewing people in, a way that was...
I'll work on one of these for you.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I wonder when you're going to start doing that. It's just quite... Yeah, I don't know. I find it very frustrating even today when you see people being interviewed, and there's no... You can put a challenging question to somebody in a very friendly way, in a way that just to suggest you're talking about giving context to their answer, which a lot of people just don't do. They just ask whatever questions on the list, and then they get their answer and they kind of move on. But normally it's the next question that makes the difference. My editor always used to say, just ask the next question. They'll give an answer, go, oh, that's interesting, but why did you do that?
Yeah.
Oh, and then how did that affect everybody else? And how did that inform how you did business from then onwards? So I think that kind of training was really, really useful in...
So you felt like that helped you, whenever you were starting out, just get better content out of these tailors.
Yeah.
Which can be a little difficult to pull information from these guys because, so much of, I guess, London kind of trades culture, like service culture, is discretion.
Yeah.
Right? So you have guys that probably aren't used to
talking about it the same way.
Because, for risk of offending someone, what they might not know or...
No, that's very true. Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that the English tailors are different to a lot of the other ones around the world is they've always been big enough that you've had very much the tailors or the cutters that are really craftsmen in the back room, and then you've had front of house or salespeople in the front. And those front of house people are very used to kind of talking about the craft and selling it. But again, it's a sales pitch.
Yeah.
It's not what we kind of love most of the time, which is talking to
the
somebody
craft.
who's a real maker and kind of talking about how they do it. So, but it's funny, I think often this happens in lots of different cultures and lots of different types of craft and arts, but people think of England as being the mecca of traditional menswear unless they're English and actually live here, and then they just horrified at the fact that everyone around them is dressing terribly the entire time. You know, all the Italians want to be English, but all the English want to be Italian, or you know, or maybe they want to be like Ralph Lauren, or they want to be American and wear sportswear, but they certainly don't want to be English.
Yeah.
It seems like the most naff thing in the world.
It's funny how what's in your backyard you kind of have the least appreciation for.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, the Ivy style people in New England.
Yeah.
You know, probably
The ones actually doing
most
it.
Americans don't really think about that.
Yeah.
Right, but then you see the Japanese that are, you know, all fanatical about, you know, that era of style.
Yeah.
So as you've traveled, I mean, you know, how has your sense of craft kind of evolved? I mean, you know, you started out in London, you know, kind of doing bespoke. You know, there's a certain way of bespoke here. You know, you've spent time in France, you've spent time in Italy. I mean, how do you compartmentalize and really begin to differentiate? You know, there's all these tailors. How do you separate them all?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, when I started with British tailoring, because that's what was here, and there's obviously a very rich tradition of it. But I think over time, you become aware of other styles. I think particularly Italian style, you know, just as one thing is what you're aware of kind of first, because it seems so different. And then when you learn about different tailors and different traditions in different parts of Italy or in France or elsewhere, then it's really the style that kind of captures you. You know, you see jackets that just look completely different to what you're used to from Savile Row, and that gets you interested. And I guess over time, I've then just tried more and more of those tailors. I think I don't even know now, it's 50 plus tailors I've tried, and you just get a sense of all those little variations, and you learn things like, you know, there definitely is something that is a Neapolitan style, but there's actually more variation within it than a lot of people give it credit for.
Within the Neapolitan style.
Yeah.
Because Naples is prolific with tailors. I mean, there's more tailors in Naples than there are probably here in London.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, craft of lots of sorts. I mean, you find that in other places like Portugal as well, for example. It's usually in the slightly poorer places that haven't really had the Industrial Revolution to the same extent, don't have the factories and the mechanization that still retain some of those kind of handcrafts.
Interesting. So, but what else do you think, I mean, is something that you think is important and that you look for kind of in a relationship with a bespoke maker? Because, I mean, you've worked with a lot of people, you know, you've traveled and worked with, I guess, a lot of consultancy clients where you're kind of, I guess, taking them through this process,
Yeah.
you know, on a personal basis. How do you guide people, and what do you think are the hallmarks of kind of a great bespoke relationship where you're getting work you're happy with? And
So I guess this relationship is useful in a few different ways. I guess one is that there's a part of a relationship with a bespoke maker which is just really enjoyable, in the fact that you walk into H&M, you meet a salesperson, they're not going to be the salesperson next time you walk in, but the same person's going to be making your shoes, or you're going to talk to the same person next time and they're going to know what you had made last time, what you like, and develop a wardrobe over time. That's a really nice aspect of bespoke, but you should be able to have that with pretty much any bespoke maker. Then I guess if you personally get on with a bespoke maker, if you have a lot in common, you have a real relationship, they really feel like a friend, that's really nice. But I'd also say that I think some people I know, for whatever reason, they prioritize that really highly. I kind of say I think that is important, but more important than that probably is the product, and the product really has to be something that you really love and that really, really works for you. And I think sometimes people have a very, very strong relationship with a tailor, and as a result, they kind of don't really want to consider anyone else. They'll say they're the best tailor in the world and haven't really kind of tried anybody else.
Yeah.
And I'm playing devil's advocate there slightly, because I do think the relationship is extremely important. But I always, I guess, from the sort of analytical approach that I tend to take, think that you've got to be able to look at the product and understand it. And
what are those elements that you think that you would look at for someone else, right? So if you were, kind of walking someone through this journey and they just received their first suit? I mean, what are the things that, you would point them towards and say, okay, yes, the jacket fits, like you can wear it, but, these are the other things that I think we should be looking at,
So from a sort of
maybe
fit,
technical level, technical fit perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So I think some of the fundamentals of kind of looking for a really good fit are the fact that the collar should be flush against the back of your neck, sit very nicely, not separate too much when you're kind of moving around. The suit should feel like it follows the contours of your body, but isn't too tight. I think there's a tendency with young guys a lot to have jackets that are extremely tight, and that's because they want to feel that on them, and that makes them look bigger. But even when you have bespoke, when people have bespoke things for the first time, there's always a tendency to try to want to make it tighter. And actually, most of the time, it's more flattering to have it kind of skim the body, but not look like it's pulling.
Yeah.
If something looks like it's pulling, that shows it's too tight and makes you look fat.
And it's not going to be comfortable either.
Smaller. And it's also not going to be comfortable as well. So, yeah. So there's a whole bunch of things for a fit point of view, but I think those are kind of a couple of the main ones.
Yeah.
I think the style point of view in terms of picking a bespoke tailor is the one that people often struggle with a little bit more. And I'd say most of the time what's really helpful is to think about the different styles of tailors and how they would fit into your lifestyle. Don't buy a tailor just because you think the style looks great when you're never going to wear it. But that kind of separation I talked about before of the kind of the formal and the more casual. And then there are some amazing makers, a bit like Cifanelli, someone like Edward Sexton or Chipper and Morgan in London, that make very distinctive, quite loud styles, which are wonderful, but you really can't wear into the office every day. Well, most people can't wear into the office every day. But maybe you get it for a black tie for a special event, or you get it as kind of a one suit that you can wear to kind of particular special occasions or parties or whatever it might be. So it's often thinking about how the style fits the function, I think, that makes a big difference.
And what about good, better, best? I mean, that's another conversation that a lot of people, I feel like, get stuck in. It's this like moral conversation of, what's good, better, and best. I mean, there's the technical aspect, which is very objective.
Yeah.
But, it's more than a one-dimensional.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more than like a one criteria,
Yeah.
Decision as to, who you have things made from. And most people, might have one or two tailors max. I mean, they're not going to have 50 people, that they've had the opportunity to go have things made by. So,
also a good example of this, as you well know, to have my own plug. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Finest Menswear in the World, where we took every chapter took a different type of menswear and tried to work out actually what created quality or the finest in that aspect. And what you find is with some types of garment, the quality points can go on forever. So when you go from a ready-to-wear suit to a made-to-measure suit to a bespoke suit, there's so many different levels of hand width you could put in it that theoretically make it better. Whereas other things like a good tie, well, you want a good quality silk, but frankly that's not that expensive. You want it to have a hand-sewn slip stitch up the back so you can kind of move freely. But beyond that, there isn't that much to a really good tie. It's mostly more about design and aesthetics and things rather than actually the quality of the make. So I think it varies hugely between different categories how much can be kind of quality.
Yeah. Well, anytime you're having something handmade, there's also going to be just a natural degree of variation, right? Because, humans are making it.
Yeah.
Right? So I find that a lot of people, you'll see something that's made bespoke and they'll say, well, that doesn't fit right perfectly, or the crease is, not exactly how I'd want it, or, I mean, I don't know, like you can always nitpick, something.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I feel like, like the Japanese are really good about almost being so perfect it's clinical.
Yeah.
But then it kind of takes...
Almost so perfect you can never wear them, though.
Yeah, but it takes some of the humanity out of it, whereas, if you have a relationship with someone and, you've known them for several years and you have good chemistry, some of the imperfections actually what creates...
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it almost in some ways, I don't want to say elevates the product, right? Because you don't want something that's like got all these imperfections, but at the same time, you have to live with a certain degree of...
Oh, yeah, but it's also, I think shoe polishing is a very good example as well, because basically every time you polish that pair of shoes, you're making it slightly different.
Slightly different.
It doesn't look different to the same as when I first had it, and it's not going to look the same now. In fact, shoes, in a weird way, thank you, shoes make the thing it makes least sense to get obsessed about, because the soles, by definition, as soon as you walk in them, are going to start getting scuffed. The upper, as soon as you start wearing it and bending it, is going to start looking used as well. You if you want a shoe that looks perfect, you should just get like patent shoes and just have plastic.
Yeah.
You'll just dress yourself in plastic if that's what you want. I think it's something that people really realize in time.
I think it's part of the wisdom
of beauty.
Of someone that's been buying Bespoke for a while. I mean, at some point you start out with the quest for perfection, but I don't feel like that's where people end. Like at the end of the day, they don't want what's perfect; they want something else.
No, exactly. And I think it's also, I don't want to say it's a more sophisticated approach, but it's certainly a more old-fashioned traditional approach. Like for example, with interiors, there's a strong tradition of the kind of English country house approach to interiors, which is basically the best quality things, but worn absolutely threadbare. So it's wonderful carpets, but have just been kind of worn completely out, or sofas that are basically falling apart and things. And that over time, as people get older, I think that's the kind of aesthetic that really appeals to people. And it's shoes. If you asked, actually, probably my favourite pair of shoes is a pair of Edward Green Oundles that I've had, just because they are my oldest pair of good shoes. And because they've been resold 3 times, they're basically falling apart. One shoe looks almost a different colour to the other one. They look nothing like the original pair of shoes I first had, because they've been repolished so many times. But they probably are my favourites, and they still look great, and they can be polished up a bit, still look really elegant. But there's an emotional connection to them there. You wouldn't have to something which is kind of perfect, and really you just want to put on a mantelpiece.
Thanks for coming in, and I guess tomorrow we've got the World Championship of shoemaking and the World Championship of shoe shining. I think you said you're out of town, so we won't see you there tomorrow, will we?
I think I should be able to drop in, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. I did point with my kids, but I can make it from the afternoon.
Are you going to bring them with you, or?
No, I don't think they would enjoy that.
Yeah. Well, it's been, I just got finished with judging, and it's really fascinating to see the work kind of being put into some of these shoes. And I think it's exciting to just see a renewed interest in bespoke craftsmanship, because you walk down Savile Row and you see these incredible firms that have existed for 100 plus years, and I think in the casualization of kind of modern society, I mean, one of my questions is, are these people still going to be around for my children? And I hope the answer is yes. But we'll see what we can do about that. So, Simon, hey, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
And of course, you can read all of Simon's content at permanentstyle.co.uk.
.com now.
Permanentstyle.com. And you've got some videos on YouTube also, so check out Simon's YouTube channel. And otherwise, thank you for everything you do for us.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thanks, Kirby.
Cheers.